All right, let's jump right into this. Today, we're going to step into the shoes of a top-tier management consultant and crack a classic business problem. We're going to unpack the logic, the frameworks, and the exact mindset they use to advise a major company on a huge multi-million dollar decision. So picture this. You've just been hired by a chief operating officer. Her company's entire distribution network is about to be made totally obsolete, all because of some new government regulations. She has to make a choice, and it's got to be fast. Does she spend an absolute fortune to upgrade their own operations, or does she just hand over the keys to somebody else? And this is not just a made-up scenario. This is a real case study, famously called the Up in Smoke case, and it's used to train elite consultants at the best firms in the world. So for the next few minutes, you're the one in the hot seat. You're the one who has to deliver that final recommendation. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, first things first, a great consultant never, ever jumps to conclusions. You got to start by making sure everyone is on the exact same page about the problem. So let's lay out the facts of the case and really get to the heart of the challenge facing the COO. So here's the deal. Up in Smoke has always handled its own deliveries with its own fleet of trucks. But the government is about to roll out new rules that say every single truck has to have sophisticated electronic tracking, for routes, speed, brakes, the whole nine yards. Their current fleet, it's basically just a bunch of old-school dumb metal boxes on wheels. They're completely obsolete. This new rule is forcing their hand, and it's triggering this massive, massive decision. So, we've got the facts straight. What's the first move? It's really tempting to just dive headfirst into the spreadsheets and the data, but that is a classic mistake. The first and honestly the most critical step for any top consultant is to create a structure, a logical roadmap that's going to guide the entire analysis. This way, you make sure no stone is left unturned and you don't get lost in all the noise. At its heart, this is a textbook make versus buy decision. Path one is make. They write a huge check, upgrade their entire fleet, and keep full control over everything. Their drivers, their routes, their schedules. Path two is buy. They get out of the trucking business completely and hire a logistics specialist to do it for them. Basically, they'd be trading control for convenience and, well, someone else's expertise. Now, to compare these two paths the right way, we can't just make a random list of pros and cons. That's not going to cut it. We need to use a core principle in consulting called MEIS. It stands for Mutually Exclusive, Collectively Exhaustive. It sounds complicated, but it's a really simple, powerful idea. You just break a problem down into pieces that don't overlap, but when you put them all back together, they cover every single important part of the decision. So for this case, a really powerful and simple MEIS way to slice this is to split our whole analysis into two big buckets. First, we're going to look at the pure economics, the hard numbers, the costs, the investments. That's the quantitative side. Then, and only after we've done that, we'll analyze the qualitative side, the hidden dangers, the strategic risks, and all the stuff that you just can't cram into a spreadsheet. All right, let's dive into that first pillar, following the money. To give the COO a solid recommendation, we absolutely have to understand the full financial story of each option. This is where we build the actual business case. But before we can find the answer, we have to ask the right questions, right? Like, what are the huge one-time costs? What are the recurring costs we'll have to pay every year? What's the total cost of each option over a realistic time frame, say 5 years? Posing these questions is literally how we start to build the skeleton of our financial model. So we'd build a financial model that looks something like this. See, for the in-house option, we've got this massive one-time capital expenditure, or CAPEX. That's the big upfront investment in new trucks and tech. Then you have the ongoing stuff, like paying drivers and buying fuel. On the other hand, with the outsource option, there's basically no CAPEX, but you have this predictable annual contract fee. The whole goal here is to calculate and compare the 5-year total cost of ownership for both paths, so we can see which one is actually cheaper in the long run. But here's the thing. A purely economic decision can be a total trap. The cheapest option is not always the best one. And this, right here, is where top consultants really earn their fees, by moving beyond the spreadsheet to pressure test those numbers against everything that could go disastrously wrong. And to do this well, we use another simple MEIS framework. We just split the risks into two buckets, internal and external. Internal risks are the things we can, potentially control inside the company, like if the drivers go on strike. External risks are those big market forces we have no control over, like if fuel prices suddenly go through the roof, or if our logistics partner goes bankrupt.
And this is where we can pull in a classic strategy tool like Porter's Five Forces to really deepen our thinking. Now, this framework looks at a bunch of stuff, but the one force that changes dramatically if we outsource is the bargaining power of suppliers. I mean, think about it. By outsourcing, we could become completely dependent on a single company for a mission-critical part of our business. Their power over us just skyrockets. We have to ask the tough question: what happens if they decide to double their prices when it's time to renew the contract?
Okay, so we have our economic model and we have our risk profile. We know the costs and we know what could go wrong. The final step is what we call synthesis. It's all about bringing everything together into a single, coherent, and totally defensible recommendation for the client. You know, the case study itself has this sharp little reminder from the interviewer. This is not just an academic exercise. Consulting happens in the real world, and it absolutely demands professional objectivity. It's about focusing on solving the client's problem no matter what industry they're in. It's about data-driven advice, not your personal feelings. Ultimately, the recommendation lives right here, in the space between these two competing factors. So let's just say our model shows outsourcing is way cheaper. That's a huge plus, right? But what if our risk analysis shows it's also super dangerous because it creates a single point of failure? The best answer is rarely the cheapest one. The real value we bring as consultants is in finding the recommendation that intelligently balances those economic gains against the strategic risks the company is actually willing to take on. All right, let's zoom out from the Up and Smoke company for a second and really nail down the key lesson here. Because this isn't just about trucks and regulations, it's about a repeatable method you can use for solving almost any complex problem. This four-step playbook, structure, quantify, assess risks, and then synthesize, is an incredibly powerful mental model. You can apply this logical flow to pretty much any complex decision you're facing, whether it's in business or, frankly, in your own life. It's a system for thinking clearly when the pressure is on. So the real key takeaway here is that the process, how you get to the answer, is often more important than the final answer itself. And now that you have the consultant's framework for thinking through this entire problem, what would you recommend? Would you play it safe and advise the COO to make that huge investment just to keep control? Or would you roll the dice on the cheaper but definitely riskier path of outsourcing? Let me know what you think.